Back at it again, it's your boys Cole and Steven Cusumano. He's Cole, I'm Steven, and most importantly, this is the Money Stop, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, presented by Kicking the Tires and SharpLink Gaming per BetMGM. And Cole, Kyle Larson, a winner at Vegas. We're going to head to our bread and butter, our home track this week, Phoenix. But first things first, Cole, Kyle Larson, a winner, Hendrick Motorsports winners in 2 of the first 3 weeks of the season. And I should say first things first, you were there in Sin City. You got to see everything firsthand from start to finish play out over the weekend. What are your takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest thing is obviously Kyle Larson being dominant once again at Vegas. He just seems pretty much automatic at that place whenever we go there in this next-gen car. So that's always, it's always fun seeing those performances in person. Just, it's so tough winning these races, and to put in a performance like that, all those laps led, sweeping the stages, and getting the win is really impressive. Hats off to him and Cliff Daniels. They always, call a great race wherever we go, but especially Vegas. Biggest takeaways from that race, I would say that, listening to what Cliff Daniels said post-race, it resonated a lot with me watching that race, and the fact that there was a lot of parity. I feel like we saw a lot of teams tighten the gap compared to last year and just the season in general. Stewart-Haas Racing, those Fords looked really good, specifically the number 10 of Noah Gragson scoring that top 10 finish. Chase Briscoe also had a lot of speed in this race. Can't forget to mention the other Fords of Ryan Blaney with a podium finish, finishing third. Really, really strong race. Toyotas of Joe Gibbs Racing looking a little bit stronger here than I had initially thought through the two at the drafting track. So I think leaving Vegas, there are more questions than answers with the first quote-unquote real race of the season. And you throw in the fact that we're having a new modified short track package once again at Phoenix, there is again even more questions. So I think just having the experience that we have, having been to Phoenix all these years and just with the next-gen car, and going off what we know from this year and the last couple of years, that we'll have a good show lined up for Phoenix, but there are still very much a lot of questions to be answered going into this fourth race of the season.
Yeah, you're right, Cole. It's kind of funny because I led into this Vegas race saying that we're going to learn more at this race than we are in the previous two at Atlanta and at Daytona. But like you said, more questions than answers still entering Phoenix. And I think my big takeaway, of course, is that Kyle Larson has come to play again. He was the overwhelming favorite per Vegas at plus 400 last week and came away victorious. Looking at the rest of the top 10, though, Cole, my pick to win came in second. That was Tyler Reddick. Ryan Blaney round up third. Ross Chastain fourth. Ty Gibbs with a very strong day in fifth. Another youngster in Noah Gragson with a very strong day wound up in sixth at his home track. Martin Truex Jr. seventh. Denny Hamlin eighth. Joey Logano ninth. And William Byron in 10th. I should mention, Cole, one of our big favorites last week, Kyle Busch, was having a really strong race until running into some self-inflicted trouble last week. Self-inflicted meaning both he and the team. But that kind of sunk a lot of our DFS lineups as he was one of the cheaper aces that we liked there. But definitely some other prop bets and some other big money bets that hit last week. And the analysis spot on once again with some of the other drivers that we had in our favorites category, and Tyler Reddick and Kyle Larson, of course, finishing 1-2 in this race. But let's kick it into high gear, Cole. Again, we're going to our bread and butter track, which means there's a lot of money to be made at Phoenix Raceway. And as we kind of segue into this, Cole, mentioning that the starting lineup for this race will be determined on Saturday at 2:10 Eastern Time. So if you're new to the show, we tend to do these episodes prior to the cars hitting track, which is, of course, something that is important to take note of because we don't have all of the, I guess, necessarily up-to-date practice and qualifying numbers in front of us, but we're going based off the numbers and trends from the last several seasons, which I feel is honestly a very strong way to do things because it doesn't, the recency doesn't cloud our judgment in any way. But and another cool thing, Cole, is that we like our paint schemes on this podcast. We do our nickel or dime segment, keeping on the money theme. We give a 5 or 10 out of 10 to all the paint schemes that we see that are special to any given track, any given week. And the fun thing is that you were in attendance last week, so you tweeted out the paint schemes in person rather than a graphic, and you picked out your dimes. I picked out my dimes and nickels, if there were any. So we're going to do the same this week because, of course, you will be at Phoenix. This is your big week of the season, along with the November race weekend where the champion is crowned. But you will post pictures of our nickel or dime paint schemes this week when you see them on the grid on Sunday. So we'll find out how they line up on Saturday. That's mostly important for daily fantasy purposes, but also just for a track in Phoenix that has always been one where, track position is paramount. It'll be important to take that into consideration before locking in any bets, but also taking it into consideration, Cole, the fact that these lines do move, and if we see a good value, you might want to take advantage of it before the cars hit the track, which is another advantage to us recording these episodes prior to that happening. And there's also a greater chance of you hearing this if, we release the episode earlier, which is the main reason we do these so early. But as we get into things, Cole, pre-qualifying odds per DraftKings this week, it is no surprise who the favorite is. It is Kyle Larson at plus 550 after a dominant showing at Vegas last week. And then behind him, you've got Ryan Blaney at plus 650 after he won the championship, but not the race there at the finale in 2023. William Byron plus 700 is third. He won this race a year ago. Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain round out the top five at plus 900. Should mention that Ross Chastain was the winner of the race in November. As we segue that way, Cole, into our favorites category. I've done a lot of talking these past couple of minutes, so why don't you kick off our favorites category here?
Awesome. I'm going to kick things off here with a guy that has a win and an additional top 10 in 2024 in William Byron at plus 700 for the race win and $11,000 for DFS, which is the third most expensive. Again, he won this race in the spring, led the second most laps in both Phoenix races last year, with the 171 laps led total between 3 of 4 next-gen starts, which is the third most in the series. On top of that, a 7.3 average, which is the second best in the series. And he's also finished top 6 in his last 3 Phoenix starts, including 4th in the finale. Also want to note again, just the speed he's had all season. Made a really, really impressive rebound in that Vegas race. They ran over a trash bag in the first stage after passing like 10 cars on the first restart of the day. And they had to battle through that, plus apparently a Coors Light can in their radiator. So to have that resiliency and to have that top 10 finish after all of that, I think speaks volumes about that team and the mission they're on this season. Also cannot fail to mention that William Byron is running the Xfinity race at Phoenix this week with his engineer as the crew chief. I expect both of them to get a lot of valuable experience and knowledge from that event. And for that, he is going to be my personal favorite going into the Shriners Children 500. But we can't talk Phoenix without talking about Ryan Blaney, obviously our reigning champion. Plus 650 for the win, $11,200 for DFS, which is the second most expensive. He has done everything but win at Phoenix. No finish worse than 4th in the next-gen car there, riding back-to-back-to-back runner-up finishes. That is 3 in a row at Phoenix, runner-ups. 254 laps led in 3 starts is the most in the series, 2 of which were over 100-plus laps led in those starts. And on top of that, an astounding 2.5 average finish, which is obviously a series best. I think he's a steep value, but for great reason, obviously. But in my opinion, of the top 3 heavy hitters, Byron, Blaney, and Larson, he is probably the best value from a race winner sense. And I would say maybe DFS as well, if you're going to target one of those top 3 guys.
Yeah, when is it going to happen for Ryan Blaney at Phoenix? I really thought that if it was going to happen, it was going to be in November. But even then, when he won the championship, he became, as you said, the first champion to break that trend of also winning the race in this playoff format. But it's honestly, with Phoenix, it's very matter of fact with who these favorites are because, again, we've forecasted this race and this track very, very well over not even just the 4 years we've done this podcast, Cole, but I remember going back to like when we were kids and we would camp out at the track and, do some of these pools and bets with our tailgating crew. And I remember we would do like these $5, $10 pools and we would each pick 5 drivers. And going back to when we were like friggin' 13, 14 years old and pick our drivers based on what we saw in practice and qualifying. We were cleaning up all the way back then. So that should tell you everything you need to know about our opinions and analysis at Phoenix. And to no surprise, Cole, my 2 favorites, in addition to the 2 you mentioned that I like a lot, are the most recent race winner in Kyle Larson and the most recent race winner at Phoenix in Ross Chastain. So I'll start there with Chastain. A lot of 9s here. He has plus 900. He is also valued at $9,000 in daily fantasy. That is the 9th highest odds. So that's honestly, in terms of favorite, that's a very good value after he won And not only that, led the most laps at Phoenix in November. And I want to point out, like, this wasn't just any race. This is the championship race where those championship four are notoriously difficult to overcome and notoriously difficult to outpace and outrun. And he led the most laps in that race. And that should tell you a lot about where that team was to end last season and even where they are now. They've had a really, really strong start to the 2024 season. And not only that, Cole, it's not just the last race at Phoenix. He has had a top 3 finish in 3 out of 4 next-gen starts at this track for a 7.5 average finish. That is the 3rd best in the garage. So very quietly, Cole, he has become one of the ringers of this track. And he's also riding back-to-back top 10s this season, as well as a 4th place last week. He is easily, I mean, you mentioned the 2nd and 3rd highest priced drivers. Ross Chastain is easily the best value in this favorites tier. He should really be a value pick or a sleeper this week based on where Vegas has him kind of ranked. But we're that confident that he should be a favorite and a front runner this week. But I've got to end and round out this favorites category, Cole, with the odds-on favorite, as he was last week, Kyle Larson, plus 550. He is the most expensive driver in daily fantasy at $11,500 on your budget. Dominated the spring race last year and led over 200 laps before William Byron swooped in and won the race. Larson finished 4th. He is also riding back-to-back top 5s after finishing 3rd in the finale race last season. 12.5 average finish at Phoenix, but that is skewed due to an engine failure in this race 2 seasons ago. Spring of 2022 had the very rare engine failure, so that's a little bit skewed. He has had 3 top 10s in 3 out of 4 next-gen starts at Phoenix. So Kyle Larson, a guy you can absolutely fire up. And you mentioned at the top, Cole, how we left Vegas with more questions than answers. I think one of the answers we got out of Vegas is that Kyle Larson, again, and Cliff Daniels, that 5 team, came to play, and they are bad fast this season. You go to a track that has been very good to them in the recent history, and I fully expect Kyle Larson to start up front, stay up front, and finish up front in this race. He is the most sure bet you can get in this race. I think I'm really confident in all 4 of those favorites, but I think it's no surprise why Vegas has him as such a heavy favorite. I mean, he definitely should be, and I would be very surprised if it's not another podium day for Kyle Larson.
I definitely agree, and the only thing that was kind of like eye-opening to me was during their post-race presser at Vegas, Kyle Larson was kind of acting, I guess, bullish and saying that he doesn't think they've been really that great at Phoenix since the next-gen car. I mean, you look at those stats, though. 3 top 10 still, back-to-back top 5s, tons of laps led. I think he's kind of being coy there in a way, but then you go based off what Cliff Daniels said as well with the new short track package and how he thinks it's going to be a whole new game changer. It's a very divisive topic, by the way. There's a lot of people in the garage that say it's not going to be a big difference. Cliff Daniels, one of the brightest minds in the garage area, thinks it's going to be a big thing. So, again, a lot of unknowns there. I just think that having Cliff Daniels with that knowledge at the track from the test is going to be crucial for their success. Same thing can be said for Ryan Blaney. They also did the test as well, and he again had those really great stats along with Kyle Larson. So I think there are a lot of unknowns with this new package, but I think these 4 drivers specifically, it would be a shock if one of them did not win this race, honestly, in my opinion.
I completely agree. There's certain weeks where we say that, especially the first few weeks of this season, where we said that our sleepers or our favorites are the drivers maybe we're most confident in. But this is one of those weeks where I completely agree with you. I'd be surprised if it's not one of those 4 drivers, which, it's only race number 4, so we could look pretty stupid for saying that. I want to just harp on what you said about, what sticks out to me about this team and this driver is nothing new, but just worth kind of reinforcing the fact that they're never satisfied. To go out there in this day and age and dominate like they did, for Cliff Daniels to come out and say that his big takeaway was the fact that the playing field was even so closely from 1st to 20th, and for Kyle Larson to say, yeah, they've been good, but not that good at Phoenix. That's the sign of a consistent yearly championship contending team. When you have that kind of hunger and dissatisfaction with even coming off such a dominant race. That tells me everything I need to know about this team being a title contender, and it's what fuels perennial championship contenders, and I have very high expectations for Kyle Larson this year coming off of that race. We do got to get to some sleepers, though, Cole, because if it's not one of those four, it could be one of these four. The next drivers we mentioned, I'll kick this one off with the guy who I picked to win last week, the runner-up, Tyler Reddick, plus 1,400. He is valued at 8,500 in daily fantasy this week. At Phoenix, couple of third-place finishes. He also has 2 finishes on 22nd and 23rd at Phoenix in the next-gen era. So it's been very hit or miss for Tyler Reddick at this track. He also hasn't led any laps here. I would be more inclined to look at Tyler Reddick at a intermediate track like we had last week at Vegas, which is why I picked him to win last week. But again, coming off a strong runner-up day in Vegas, I think that there's definitely reason to believe that he can carry that momentum into this track that he has had very good success at, but obviously just a mixed bag. So just know that with that plus 1,400 price range and an $8,500 dollar range in daily fantasy or $8,500 value, there is some amount of risk baked into that. Another guy that was, I guess, served as a risky play last week was Kyle Busch, who was a very heavy favorite both on this podcast and in terms of Vegas. I think he had a top 5 odds at his home track and looked strong, but we talked about the problems they ran into. Kyle Busch, plus 1,000 to win this race, 9,200 in daily fantasy, which is one of the intermediately priced drivers, just ahead of Ross Chastain in the top 10. One of only a few drivers with top 10s in 3 out of 4 next-gen starts at Phoenix. He did finish 25th in the finale race here last year for an 11.8 average finish in the next-gen era with no laps led. But even with that 25th place finish, Cole, that is the 6th highest average finish of any driver in the garage. So that should tell you quite a bit about where he is at with regards to Phoenix, a track that throughout his entire career, going back to the Joe Gibbs, even the Hendrick days, the Xfinity days, has been very kind to Kyle Busch. Be wary of the pit road issues early on. Obviously, that was front and center last week, but if you're looking at a car, team, and driver that has been one of the, I would say, 3 fastest in the garage 3 weeks in a row, the 8 team and Kyle Busch is certainly included in that top 3. So Tyler Reddick and Kyle Busch, a couple guys we felt good about last week, a couple guys we feel good about this week, but based on their value, Cole, they're sleepers.
Yes, and another guy I'm considering a sleeper this week is going to be Martin Truex Jr., who is actually tied at the 5th best odds at plus 900 for the race win and $9,800 for DFS. And I'm calling MTJ a sleeper because he has not been the flashiest driver in 2024, or at Phoenix for that matter, but he's looked like one of the faster Toyotas so far this season. Started second in the finale and finished 6th for his only top 10 at Phoenix in the next-gen era. And in the races that he did finish, he finished 15th and 17th. So I think very much like the 2024 season so far, even only through 3 races, Truex isn't going to light up the stat sheets for you, but I think he has a pretty high ceiling as someone who's had a lot of success on short tracks. And I will say this, while I do think he is one of the better sleeper values, I don't think he is as good a value as guys like Kyle Busch, Ross Chastain, Tyler Reddick, and the guy I'm about to mention in Joey Logano, who is $9,500 for DFS and plus 1,200 for the race win, because Joey Logano, as we all know, won the finale in 2022 for a second championship, finished top 10 in both those 2022 races, but he did not finish better than 11th in 2023 at Phoenix. And yet, he still has 191 laps led, which is the second most in the garage, and a 9.5 average finish, which is the 5th best overall in the Cup Series at Phoenix in the next-gen era. Also, just love what I've seen from that team this year. He obviously got the pole in Daytona. He was really fast in Atlanta as well. And I think they had a pretty rough day in Vegas in terms of a consistently upfront day. They were running around the top 15, but they were able to battle back for their first top 10 of the season. And I think, the speed's been there. That's obvious. Especially within Team Penske. They've been the best Ford team by far this season. That's no joke. But I think that you look at what Joey's done so far and what he's done in his career at Phoenix, there's no reason for me to believe that he shouldn't be one of the top contenders there for a top 5 finish.
Agreed, Cole. A couple of veterans of the sport that have had success at Phoenix that are, I think, on any given week, they're very high floor options, but especially as we head to Phoenix. So our sleepers this week, Cole, Tyler Reddick, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, Martin Truex Jr., and the fact those guys are sleepers should tell you a lot about those favorites in Chastain, Byron, Blaney, and Larson. We got to talk values, though, Cole. These are drivers that are extreme long shots to win the race, but we specifically like their daily fantasy value this week at Phoenix. Again, a track position is very important. So when I'm looking at our values, I'm paying close attention to where these drivers qualify. You want to take advantage of certain lines before they move in terms of prop bets, race winner bets going into the week. But in daily fantasy, you always want to wait until the starting lineup has been determined. So keep that in mind as we go through these values. I'm going to kick it off, Cole, with the Arizona native, Michael McDowell, 6,700 in daily fantasy. And what did we say coming into the Vegas race? Front Row Motorsports came to play this year. He has scored career best at Phoenix in both of the last two races there last season. He finished 13th there in the spring and 9th in the finale, which is really good for that number 34 team. Finished 25th at Vegas, so that was a far cry from the start that they had to the season on the drafting style tracks, but obviously not very far off. Minor caution, but it's just too good a value to pass up on. Michael McDowell, the hometown guy, at 6,700 at his home track. It's just a really, really good value, and a guy that, again, you can't look past those results that he had at Phoenix Raceway last year. And next up, Cole, another value I like this week, a very brief former teammate of Michael McDowell's. If you're unable to afford the 6,700, how about compromising for a driver that is valued at 6,500? John Hunter Nemechek, who has had very good success at Phoenix in both the Xfinity and Truck Series, and now back into a full-time Cup ride in the Xfinity Series. 6 top 10s in 7 starts at Phoenix with nearly 170 laps led. Those are numbers that you can't overlook. And in the Camping World Truck Series, 2 runner-up finishes, 6 top 10s out of 9 starts at this track. So JHN is a guy that in any equipment he's been in besides the Cup Series, he's pretty much dominated the competition, and Phoenix has not eluded him in terms of that. One of the more consistent Toyota drivers so far through 3 races this season, and looking at him in the point standings to this point, 16th out of the drivers to this point with a top 10 and a 16.7 average finish. So I think they would certainly take that coming into the season. That is a strong start for this number 42 team. And again, I'm looking at a couple guys that have had strong starts to the season, Cole, in John Hunter Nemechek and Michael McDowell. They both had strong starts to the season, and they both had success at Phoenix in some degree. So a couple guys that I really like their values there in the mid to high 6,000s. But if you've got a little bit more penny to spend, you've got a couple more values that might be a little bit easier on you to include in your lineup.
Right. And the value of all values for me in this category is going to be Chase Briscoe at plus 2,500 for the win and $7,800 for DFS. Incredible all-around value with long shot odds. 3 top 10s, including a win and a 4th place finish at Phoenix in the next-gen era with 114 laps led across 3 of 4 starts. 9th place average finish is the 4th best in the series. And just also want to note, to the eye test, Chase Briscoe has looked really fast this year. Both drafting tracks looked good in Vegas, and I think he's for sure been the fastest of that stable. But I think it's also pretty impressive to think the fact that Cliff Daniels mentioned him by name in his post-race press conference, saying that team has looked really good all season long. If someone like Cliff Daniels is saying that, that's a driver you should be looking at. And I think, Chase Briscoe's had a rough start to his career in the Cup Series, but the one thing that's been a constant has been his success at Phoenix. And I think another thing to really note here is that Stewart-Haas Racing in general has been really good at Phoenix, especially last year in a year where they were not good at all. So playing on that, obviously Briscoe's going to be the favorite from that stable, and I think the best value that you can get in the field this week, maybe beside Ross Chastain. But another guy I'm looking at is Josh Berry at $7,200, his teammate. And he hasn't been really flashy, but he's been very even-keeled this season so far to start his rookie campaign. Scored his first Cup top 10 in his only Phoenix start, driving that number 9 car for Chase Elliott last year. Also has 3 top 10s and 5 Xfinity starts, including a 3rd-place finish at Phoenix. And like I said, I just think it's a really strong track for Stewart-Haas Racing. It was even kind of tough for me to leave Ryan Preece off this list because he had an abysmal season last year as well, but had really good speed at Phoenix specifically. But I just have not liked what I've seen from that team in 2024. Anyway, he had inside track there. Josh Berry is also a guy that's run very well at short tracks in general. And I know Phoenix isn't really like that traditional short track, but it's a track that he's been very good at throughout his career. in the Cup Series, next Xfinity Series, and I think he's going to be someone that comes out and has a really solid day, maybe a top 15 day in Phoenix.
Love those two picks. And obviously, you look at that 4 car at Phoenix, it's going to be very bizarre to not see Kevin Harvick in it with the success he's had in that Stewart-Haas stable at Phoenix. But I think there's something to be said for the 4 car at Phoenix, and I've got that in the back of my mind. But I just love the Chase Briscoe value there. And I would argue he could even be a sleeper for the win. But you look at the 4 drivers, including 3 former champions in that sleepers tier for us. Chase had to get bumped down to the value picks, but I am definitely eyeing that plus 2,500 value for the win, and it's a little bit tempting, I'll say, is the right word I would use there. But let's narrow this down, Cole, from 12 drivers to 6. We're each going to pick 1 per category. I'm going to go with Kyle Larson as my favorite this week. My favorite sleeper is Kyle Busch, and my favorite value of those that I mentioned is Michael McDowell.
Awesome. I'm going to go with William Byron as my favorite, Joey Logano as my sleeper, and then Chase Briscoe as my value pick.
Speaking of values, Cole, another thing we like to discuss are big money bets. These are our favorite prop bets of the week. You're not going to throw a gigantic sum of money on a race winner bet. You might win handsomely, but it's just obviously a lot of risk involved in that. Big money bets are the prop bets that we like to be pretty much sure things on the weekend. And as I transitioned there with Chase Briscoe and the tempt of about plus 2,500 for the win, I like an insurance policy of plus 280 for a top 5. Again, you listen to Cliff Daniels talk about that driver and that team, and when Cliff Daniels talks about the competition, you listen to what he is saying, and I take a lot of stock into that. The former winner at Phoenix and Chase Briscoe, I think that he's just a guy that certainly piques my interest when we come to this track ever since that first career Cup Series win. Also, minus 105 for the top 10, which for me is a big money bet. I like the idea of splurging maybe on, or I started saying this last week, but sprinkling maybe on that plus 280 for the top 5, maybe even a couple bucks on the race winner odds. I just feel really good about where he's at this point in the season. Couple other bets, though, that I really like, Cole. Our 4 favorites, Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, Ross Chastain, all above even money to finish in the top 5. So pick your poison among those, and they're all plus 120 or longer odds to finish in the top 5. So I like that as an insurance policy as well if you're going to place a race winner bet. But if I had to pick 2 of those I really like, the race favorite, Kyle Larson, plus 120 to be in the top 5. Big money bet for sure, in my opinion. And then I really like Ross Chastain at plus 155 to be in the top 5. There's, I feel like, a good amount of value for top 5 prop bets entering the weekend, but those may be my 2 favorites, or at least the 2 I'm most confident in.
You know what's funny? You took the words right out of my mouth, so I'm going to keep this really short. I agree 1,000% with all of those you just named. Specifically, the Chase Briscoe top 10 minus 105. I think that's a lock all day. I love the Ross Chastain top 5. He has been, I would say, a top 3 fastest car all season, coming off that 4th place finish, which was also battled back from a speeding penalty. And you just think of his stats at Phoenix throughout the years in the next-gen car. He won the most recent race here. I love those top 5 odds. I like the Kyle Larson top 5 odds as well. But yeah, I think that all the favorites we mentioned, Ryan Blaney as well, William Byron, those are also interchangeable if you feel better about those drivers instead. But we're on the exact same page, and I could not agree more.
Moving things along here, Cole, the final kind of bet that we like to discuss are the head-to-head driver bets, which are important because they are parlayable. And again, we go to Phoenix. We've got a really good read on this track. I think it's important to consider a couple of these head-to-heads. We've got 7 different ones here. I'm just going to rattle them off and let me know if there's any that stick out to you, Cole. So we've got Martin Truex Jr. versus Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney versus Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin versus Chase Elliott, Noah Gragson versus Josh Berry, Kyle Busch versus Christopher Bell, Alex Bowman versus Ty Gibbs, and Kyle Larson versus Ryan Blaney. A lot to take in there, and honestly, they're really close, a lot of those, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. The only 2 that I was kind of feeling good about were Kyle Busch over Christopher Bell at even plus 100. I like this because we already mentioned Kyle Busch's stats, and I feel like Christopher Bell, he's someone you'd think of when we come to Phoenix because he's in the championship 4 every year. He runs well, but he cannot close these races out, and I'm starting to feel this place is kind of cursed for him. Obviously had the brake failure in the finale, But he also had an engine let go in the tire test, or not tire test, but the short track package test in December. So I just feel like this is a place that's kind of working against Christopher Bell. Not to say that he doesn't have speed when they come here, but I don't like what I've seen from that team in 2024 as well either. He's had really, really rough go at it to start the season off. I think he's wrecked in every single race to start the season. And I think those things just kind of add up, and just playing along with the history at Phoenix and how Kyle Busch has fared this season with the speed, I think that is a almost a no-brainer for me at Kyle Busch plus 100 over Christopher Bell. And then the only other one I had a decent feeling about was Ty Gibbs over Alex Bowman at minus 150. Alex Bowman's kind of flown a bit under the radar with the exception of the runner-up in the 500 this year. And Phoenix has been a place that still kind of eluded him, even being his home track. So I like what I've seen from Ty Gibbs. He's been one of the fastest Toyotas all season, had a really strong top 5 run at Vegas last week, and Phoenix is a place that he's just absolutely dominated in ARCA, Xfinity, you name it. He just killed the competition at this place. So I like those two the best. If you parlay those, it's plus 233, and you throw $10 on it, it's $33.33. A lot of threes there. So there is money to be made if you feel comfortable with those two specific matchups, but outside of those two, I think they're really, really close to call. So I wouldn't go much further than those.
I would agree with that. So as we've kind of breezed over all the different types of bets we can go with here, Cole, let's put our money where our mouth is. We talked about our big money bets, but our final order of business before we get to our actual race winner picks is our daily fantasy lineup. We like to collaborate on a DFS lineup every week. Usually there are a lot of common drivers that we discussed out of the 12 that we went in depth on every episode, and this is one of those weeks. All 6 of the drivers are 6 guys that we talked about. So it leads off with our favorite, Cole. We went with, again, out of those 4 favorites, there's one very clear value that is much cheaper than the other 3 we named that is probably just as good of a pick, and that's Ross Chastain, who's $9,000. He is the not even the most expensive driver in our lineup, but he is the driver we feel most confident about in this lineup. So he's our ace, yet he is the 3rd most expensive driver. We've got a couple of our sleepers from the show in as our 2 most expensive drivers. That is Martin Truex Jr. at $9,800 and Joey Logano at $9,500. So you've got kind of a 3-headed monster with those 3. And then, Cole, we rounded out the lineup with 3 of our favorite values of the week.
Right, and leading that off is going to be Chase Briscoe at $7,800, followed by his teammate and Josh Berry at $7,200, and then rounded out by Michael McDowell at $6,700. And I just want to say, this is a very, very difficult week for DFS if you're looking to go with one of those top 3-4 drivers in Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, Denny Hamlin. So what I did for this, I made 3 different lineups, and the 2 commonalities in that were Chase Briscoe and Josh Berry. I built all these lineups around Chase Briscoe for the most part, just because his stats at this track are really, really good, especially for his value. And I think the one that we went with that presents the most consistency. Like you have, like you said, a 3-headed monster in Ross Chastain, Joey Logano, and Martin Truex Jr. I tried doing the same thing with Ryan Blaney and William Byron. I wasn't even going to attempt Kyle Larson because his value was just stupid for DFS this week. But, I mean, like you look at those lineups, I just think that there's a lot better chance for you to have a quality day from those former champions in Truex and Logano, and then someone like Michael McDowell and Josh Berry, as opposed to like a Tyler Reddick or a John Hunter Nemechek. You know, I just feel like that is what presents you the highest probability of coming ahead and making money this weekend.
I agree with you, and for that reason, I'm glad you mentioned a few of the kind of alternative lineups to that one that we kind of put our name behind, because I mentioned it near the beginning of this episode, the fact that you can't lock this in really until you see where everyone qualifies, especially in daily fantasy, because the values are going to stay the same of all these drivers. So I feel like the tiebreaker on which of those different variations you might want to lock in, the tiebreaker has to be where they start, because it's important to get those place differential points. It's also important to have that ace that's going to start up front, have a lot of fast laps, lead a lot of laps. But I agree with you in the sense that Chase Briscoe's a guy that I think regardless of where he starts, he's got to be included in the lineup. But I feel pretty good about this. Again, it's a tough week. I feel like every time we go to Phoenix, it's a difficult week for DFS because of how much we know about this track. And again, for us, how easy it's been to predict. But it's good to have a few alternatives in mind, and I'm glad you brought that up for this week. All that said, Cole, let's wrap this up. Put a bow on it. We've got to put our money where our mouth is and give you our race winner and sleeper picks. This is every week. Every week on this podcast, we give you our gut call. Sometimes we throw out a name that we haven't even mentioned the entire episode just because it's our gut feeling. And I kind of also alluded to this with how long we've been coming to Phoenix. I mean, there was a point where you and I, Cole, had been to every race at this track for 12 or 13 years in a row. At least that was my streak. I think yours is even longer than that. But we just have a really good instinct and gut feeling for what happens at Phoenix Raceway for whatever reason. We always call it our second home for a very good reason. So this is where your ears should probably be peaked up at this point. And we take turns every week because we don't allow each other to pick the same drivers on a given race weekend. But I get to pick first this week, Cole, for race winner, and I'm going to go with the 12, Ryan Blaney. I think it's finally going to happen for Blaney. I feel like we've said it so many times on this podcast, like, what does he got to do to win at this track with how well things have gone for him? I have just a gut feeling here, Cole, that after he got that monkey off his back with the finale and winning the championship, even though he didn't win the race, I feel like winning the championship in November was what he needed to get that winner monkey off his back, so to speak, at Phoenix. I feel like now that that's kind of out of the way and he's had that kind of celebration here, I just have a gut feeling that he's going to be the race winner. He's plus 700 for the win on BetMGM right now. And again, there's some really strong picks. We talked about our confidence in those four: Larson, Blaney, Byron, Chastain. My gut's telling me it's Ryan Blaney's week at Phoenix.
I gotta say, following Vegas, my immediate gut was telling me that Ryan Blaney was going to win that race. I just think that a lot of the talk was on Larson at that point. Obviously, a really dominating performance, and Chevrolet has won the first three races of the season. So obviously, Ford wants to make a statement. Ryan Blaney wants to make a statement, going back to the side of his championship where he finished runner-up again for a third straight time. So I was thinking, you know what? It's put up or shut up time. This is where it's going to make a statement and just go out and dominate and win the race, which very well could happen. However, making this outline, I kind of convinced myself that I think that William Byron's going to win this race. He did it last year, kind of stole it from Kyle Larson, but I just like what I've seen from this team this season. Obviously got the win in the 500, had a really strong car at Atlanta, rebounded from a really difficult day for a top 10 in Vegas. And then he just had a lot of success at this track. And I think I mentioned it at the very end of my analysis. I really, really do believe that extra track time for William Byron in the Xfinity race, on top of having the experience and the knowledge from his engineer who's going to be crew chiefing that race, is going to pay off in a really big way for that team. For a sleeper, we're looking at Chris Buescher and down in the odds for BetMGM. And I am going to go just a few ticks down that list to Josh Berry at plus 8,000 for the win. I just like what I've seen from this driver in the limited time he's run in the Cup Series. Had a couple of top 10s. The first one coming at Phoenix. He's ran well here in the Xfinity Series. So I think Josh Berry is going to be someone that has a really solid, serviceable day for DFS and a potentially top 15 day. Just speaking on his success at this track and Stewart Haas Racing's success at this track as well.
I love it. I love both those picks. I love everything you had to say about William Byron and Josh Berry. I'm going to throw out one of those infamous names, Cole, that we haven't even mentioned once this entire episode, because I got to pick a sleeper as well. And you referenced the fact that Chris Buescher and down, we like to call our sleepers those that are outside the top 15 in odds, and 16th would be Chris Buescher. My driver I'm going to pick as the sleeper for this race is Daniel Suarez, and he is valued at plus 10,000 for the win. And I don't necessarily think he's going to go out there and win the race. I just think that speed is contagious. We saw how fast the one of Ross Chastain was at this track in November. We've seen how fast he's been this year. I mean, Daniel Suarez is one of our 3 race winners to this point in the season. I just really think that speed is contagious. He's been fast recently. That team's been fast recently. They've been fast at Phoenix at times before. And you go to what is essentially Daniel Suarez's home track, being from Monterrey, Mexico, and you get so many of Daniel's amigos here. He always wants to show out here. We've seen him perform well at this race, actually in the Mexico Series, growing up when we were younger, Cole. So he's got that knack for this track, at least in his history at some point. I take a lot of stock into the fact that there's a lot of speed in that Trackhouse Racing camp right now, and I'm going to pick Daniel Suarez as my sleeper. Now, Cole, as any money stop or any pit stop in general ends, that's how we end this show. We're going to drop the jack here on this most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. But I mentioned at the top, Cole, this is one of your biggest weekends of the season, being that you are a journalist for various bylines, including Kicking the Tires, including the Arizona Republic, and this is kind of your Super Bowl weekend outside of November, which of course is the week the champions crown. So you're going to be there for every step of the way. Keep posted on social media at @the_money_stop for all the content we've got brewing, and at Cole_Cusumano_ on Twitter as well. I know you're going to be very active. What can we look forward to from you this week at the track?
Well, I want to lead off by saying, as of today, March 7th, the Thursday of the race week, I had a story come out with the Arizona Republic focused on Kyle Larson's home life in Arizona. I really, really enjoyed doing this piece. Got to talk to him one-on-one last weekend in Vegas, just about basically his family. And, we're obviously Italian, so family is a huge thing in our household. And I just, you don't really see a lot from Kyle Larson in front of the cameras. He's very reserved. But I just feel like you really got a sense for like how much of a family guy he is from the conversation I had. And I really wanted to emulate that in this story. And I think it'll resonate a lot with people checking it out. So that's on Arizona Central, azcentral.com, and in the Arizona Republic newspaper. Bulk of the work's going to be coming out for the Arizona Republic this weekend, doing a sort of press release on the Viva La Fiesta for your sleeper Daniel Suarez. They're going to be having a Hispanic-themed fan zone at Phoenix Raceway with a bunch of really cool events going on. Daniel Suarez will be out there. But I also have one coming out this weekend on Eric Jones' new jackman, Kellen Mills. He used to play football for ASU. He's a Mesa guy, and he's making the jump from both Team Penske and Joe Gibbs Racing to now Legacy MC. So a bit of a step down to a smaller team, but he's been tasked with sort of revitalizing their pit program and building that thing up from the ground up. And it was a really good conversation with him, the pit crew coach, so that'll be coming out this weekend as well. And then just the usual, just sort of the race recaps, previews, some sidebars here and there on some Arizona guys. So be a very busy weekend for sure, but I'm looking forward to getting out there to the track tomorrow, and as you're hearing this today on Friday. So it's going to be a good time. It always is a good time. As you mentioned, it's our second home, and just love that place, man.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up all that you have in the works right now, because for me, like going to so many races at this track, literally growing up there and that being kind of my home away from home for literally my entire childhood into my adult life, it's so difficult watching these races on TV from out in New Jersey and reading your content and just watching some of the various other content that guys like Devin Henry and friends of the program produce. It makes me feel like I'm there, and I'm really excited to consume this one this weekend. It's going to be a really fun one. I'm also very excited to read that Kyle Larson piece that you've got coming out, as well as the Kellen Mills one, friend of the program. Big fan of his here on the Money Stop. It's the Shriners Children's Hospital 500, one of our favorite race weekends of the season. Hope you're able to take something from this episode, from what Cole and I have had to say. But once again, we're going to drop the jack. Thank you all so much for tuning into this, the Money Stop, the most important NASCAR betting stop of your weekend. Thank you all again. For Cole, I'm Steven, and we'll see you next week.